Welcome, welcome to the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shauna Payne Gold, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm here with Dr. Lisa. How are you?
Hi there. Hi, everyone. Pronouns she, hers. I am doing well. And
Awesome.
we are shaking things up a little bit this week. We're going to try.
Yes,
we're
yes,
we're
yes.
drop we're dropping down to two phases instead of three because we've been noticing that there's
Hmm.
just so much that's happening that we want to talk about on this show that we are either going super long on our phases or we're just not getting deep enough. So this
Yes.
is this is the first week we're going to give this two phases a go so we can get a little bit more depth into some of these pretty consequential issues and occurrences that we're seeing happening, a mile a minute.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, yeah, makes
that's
sense.
that's the plan.
Makes sense. Yes, yes. So I appreciate the desire for a bit more depth, considering that we never run out
Mm-hmm.
of topics to talk about here. So let's get
Yep.
into our word of the week, given that Lisa, I went back into the crates and dug up some some old skill sets that are very old from my undergraduate degree in marketing specifically. And folks will probably see how it connects later on, but our word of the week is scarcity marketing. Scarcity marketing. And it's the sense of urgency or exclusivity among consumers like us that makes products or services seem more desirable because they're perceived as limited or hard to obtain, right? So, Lisa, I know you recall during the pandemic, for example, there was a limit to the number of packs of toilet paper that you could get, or the packs of cleaning products. Even now, there's a limit. I just saw in my own grocery store the limit to the number of dozen eggs that you can purchase.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
all of these things have been kind of interesting. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, this is interesting because we don't necessarily know what they have out back there, if there actually are fewer, or if there's the perception that there's fewer. And so this entire concept of scarcity marketing actually leverages our psychology and how we even shop or look for things to consume because there's this FOMO going on. We fear that we're going to miss out on something, which then drives us to put more value on things that previously had been very scarce. I'm going to date myself a little bit, Lisa, but I remember when Michael Jackson passed away, his albums shot through the roof as far as how pricey they became
Mm,
overnight because there was this scarcity marketing around he's gone. So now we need to gather all of these things that remind us of
yeah.
him and his body of work. And so everybody goes running out to get things when the day before, when he was still living, nobody was really thinking about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That perception of scarcity when the same amount was out there all the time, right?
Right. Right.
And so with that, I think that's going to apply to a few things here that we're going to talk about, Lisa, but I'm sure you've experienced scarcity marketing at some point in your life before.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So, all right, well, let's dive into phase one, and that may give us even more context for our word of the week. So, as many folks know that have been longtime listeners of this podcast, I am equal distance between Baltimore and Washington, D.C., which means that I am right here on the cusp of Annapolis, Maryland, which is most people don't know the city of Annapolis per se, but they are aware of the military academies, including the Naval Academy that is there. There's a number of celebrities that have gone to school there,
Mm-hmm.
coaches that have gone to school there. David Robinson, which is a NBA player that actually played there. I believe he was called the General when he was playing there. Well, even my son goes to the Naval Academy for lacrosse camp each
Right.
summer. And
Yes.
so
Yes.
we're very, very close to the water and being able to go to the Naval Academy almost anytime we want, about 20 minutes away from my house with traffic, right? And so with that, this news recently that the Naval Academy was removing nearly 400 books from their
Mm-hmm.
library as a part of an entire diversity, equity, and inclusion purge, to me, again, was, as usual, disheartening. And at the same time, Can't say I'm surprised. Still trying to figure out how that's going to actually work, considering I've never seen their actual curriculum. And so,
Right.
if anyone is still teaching anything that could even tangentially relate to this book list, how are students going to get the information that they need short
Mm-hmm.
of, virtual searches? Um, yeah, this is just yet another attempt to erase identity. We talked about this a few podcasts ago. Identity
Mm-hmm.
erasure from our military academies. This was already happening up at West Point, where they were getting rid of all of their identity-based student organizations and other things going on. It's happening in compliance with what the White House wants to happen. And so with this, I think it's sad, and yet, Lisa, it's pretty ironic too, given that in the state of Maryland specifically, we have so many connections to nationally and globally known African American leaders that it's almost difficult to go anywhere in the state of
Right.
Maryland without treading somewhere that has been
Mm-hmm.
inhabited or influenced by a Black person. Knowing that, the Naval Academy looks across the Chesapeake Bay, and that certainly connects to Harriet Tubman's Underground Railroad, which went across the Choptank River. So, given all of that, Lisa, I shall never say that I'm surprised, but at the same time, the the purge seems almost unnatural, Lisa. Like I was sharing with a
Right.
friend of mine earlier today, it would be kind of like uh, telling a plumber that you can no longer talk about or use PVC pipe or water. Like it's essential to what they do and who
Mm-hmm.
they are. It's like, telling a pilot you can't talk about the aircraft or the weather. Like what? My brain doesn't want to compute how it's even possible to purge. Now, the design, okay, we get that. There are people that are full of hate, full of fear, full of pride, full of privilege that want to get rid of certain things. And even within that, I'm like, how does that work exactly? How
Mm-hmm.
does that work? And so I would be interested to connect with my librarian friends who may have some intel
Yeah.
as far as how this is actually going to play out in real time, short of just publishing a list of books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think where you and I differ is in the way we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion as central and integrated to everything we do, right? So your example of the plumber and being told that they can't use PVC pipe, I think that would be dismissed as not an apples to apples comparison, right? Because PVC pipe is absolutely required for a plumber to do their job. Teaching cadets or students at the Naval Academy, it is not essential that they learn about the history of racism in this country or the ways in which, you know, several hundred years of racial oppression have contributed to kind of our current social, political, economic climate. Like that's the difference. You and I believe, yes, 100% that is essential, but the folks who are creating these or ordering that these lists be, well, it's not really the list, right? It's just ordering the books that have any kind of DEI component be removed. Don't see it as essential because it's not math. It's not
Mm-hmm.
English. It's not science, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they're seeing those subjects as existing outside of the
Mm-hmm.
sociocultural political environment that
Mm-hmm.
you and I understand to shape English, math, and science, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yes,
So I
yes,
don't
yes.
I don't think, yeah, I think that
Mm-hmm.
is sadly just a complete divergence in terms of how you and I and others understand and see learning and the world to
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the folks who are mandating this purge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also, what I think is really interesting is the question for me, and forgive me for going down this academic route, possibly even too far, but I'm okay with that. Is let's think about the pragmatic approach to how this happens, right?
Uh-huh.
So first question around, okay, we got people that want to purge DEI broadly from anything connected to federal government, military academies, et cetera. Okay, we have that first. The
Mm-hmm.
second thing is, okay, we know that knowledge about these topics is central to it either growing, proliferating, or not. So now we have to identify the knowledge. The knowledge comes from mostly libraries, right? So who gets to compile those 381 books to say that they are quote unquote diversity, equity, inclusion, rather than simply American history, right? Because
Right.
Lisa, you and I have talked about that before, where it's like, oh, I wish we didn't have to say it was this history or that history or what have you, but it's American history, in such a way that we've now targeted a list. So me being me being the resistant, subversive librarian, Lisa,
Right.
I don't know that I would have found 381 books that directly connected to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I
Mm-hmm.
would have found books that connect to American history. So are we going to completely purge the entire library and use it as storage now? Because, again, thinking about what constitutes American history, even compiling a list like this communicates to me that this is not, has never been, and will never be considered American history.
Yeah.
And so I have to take my cues from Germany, for example. I remember seeing a picture. I'll try to find it for you, Lisa. There was a link to a picture that was actually a monument where there was a kind of a square hole in the ground that was glass, and you could see down in there were empty bookshelves. And it was a
Mm-hmm.
placard that was a commemoration of all of the books about Jewish culture and history that had been burned. They acknowledged the problem of purging or erasing identity through literature and books in Germany.
Yeah.
We're barreling towards that situation that I fear will never be acknowledged, reversed, or commemorated in this country.
Yeah, I mean, it's, we already had book banning at the school district level where,
Yeah.
community members' parents could challenge a book and then it would be removed and maybe
Mm-hmm.
reviewed. But the folks who are engaging in that behavior don't see it as book banning. They see it as creating an environment where books are available to appropriate age groups, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's the way they
Mm-hmm.
think about it. They're not even conceptualizing it as book banning, but now we've
That's
got
right.
this kind of on a steroidal level here with the Naval Academy
Mm-hmm.
just being a particularly extreme example. But you're right. I do
Mm-hmm.
wonder. I also wonder, we don't know the identities of the librarians. We don't know their political persuasion, ideological persuasion, right? But I also wouldn't be shocked if they were threatened with their job. You do this or you're out of a job, right? And we don't know anyone's economic situation. And so I totally understand why
Mm-hmm.
someone might feel that they have to. And maybe
Oh, of course.
the 381 is only half of the books, right? So maybe they did do what you're
Oh,
suggesting, right? We don't know that.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
maybe
yeah, yeah.
they chose books that were just explicit, like in terms of the titles, but they left books that were a little bit more ambiguous, but still had some of that same material in there. That piece
Mm-hmm.
outside of going to
Oh,
that library. But I
that's right.
think, I think your point around what is US history, I mean, this has just been a constant tension, right? The fact that that we even need to say African American history, LGBT history, women's history is
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because US history has excluded those narratives, right? So in an effort to
Yeah.
say, hello, um,
Mm-hmm.
this is all part of
Mm-hmm.
it. We've created these offshoots, but those offshoots have
Yeah.
now created the runway on which
Mm-hmm.
Trump and his cronies are saying this is DEI, this is DEI, right? Because
Yeah. Yeah.
it was never fully integrated. It was always on the side of US history and US history
An
and
appendage. Yep, an
yeah, an
appendage.
appendage. And so that's just made this kind of lopping off of the appendage easier to do, I
Mm-hmm.
think.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
mhm,
Yep. Which is why I get so excited when I see people like Viola Davis and other folks that are setting up their own publishing companies to amplify voices that
right.
continue to be snuffed out like this. Because, folks might say, oh, well, why do we need to set up another or a different publishing company? for these very reasons, right?
Yep.
For these very reasons that these stories keep getting removed, or like for me, one of my goals, Lisa, and I don't know if I'm going to get to it because it's going to take me some time to do it. But I have several different lists of banned books that I've been trying to kind of consolidate because a lot of them are lists from different states, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So think about the states that we've rattled off in previous episodes, Lisa, that had the largest number of books being petitioned and
Right.
or banned, and consolidating those lists. It's like a life goal for me to have a copy, at least one copy of each of those books somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know how this affects, for example, the Library of Congress, which its entire purpose is to hold every single
Yeah. Yeah.
American ISBN, and how they're going to be affected by some of this stuff. But who's the keeper of the spoils here, right? There
Yep.
was another article that I saw that was specifically written by a scientist that works over in Greenbelt here in Maryland, that knows outright that a lot of documents related to African Americans, Native Americans here in the state of in the state of Maryland and beyond, that were fortunately being removed but not destroyed. I say that,
Mm-hmm.
in as I reflect on it. I don't want them removed, but obviously if they were destroyed, we're on a different level here. And so a couple of people have created an internal committee through their ERG to preserve them elsewhere.
Mm.
Well, what if you don't have resistance like that, whether it's covert, overt, doesn't matter. If you don't have that type of resistance, then our history just dissipates.
Yeah.
And that is my fear. Like, I don't want a world in which Maya Angelou's, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings didn't happen,
Right.
wasn't written.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to see a placard commemorating what she wrote. I don't. And I will
Mm-hmm.
say too, Lisa, that when I looked at the authors, the list itself and the authors of these books, let's be clear, they're talking about ideologies. Yes, many of these books are written by Black folks, Native Americans, our Latinx siblings, our LGBT trans siblings. And at the same time, there's also several books on this damn list that are written by white folks that are
Yeah.
allies to the work. And so you're snuffing out, again, a broader swath of, yes, identities of authors, but also the, how can I say, here we go back, Lisa. My brain wants to go back to revisionist history again, like we talked about before.
Mm.
It's never complete, a more complete American history that we continue to go back and forth with. We have more complete and then we get rid of it, and more complete, then we get rid of it. It's like, no, I'm not interested in that. It very much reminds me of Trey has been working for years on building out our family tree on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And the way his brain works is that usually it's hard for him to keep building on something. So he'll get rid of it and then he'll start over again. He started over like 10 times on this tree, where he adds, takes away, gets rid of it, adds, takes away, get rid of it. And I feel like
Mm-hmm.
that's what we keep doing with American history, specifically that speaks to non-white, the disability community, non-straight, non-Christian perspectives.
Yeah.
We build out the family tree and then we completely obliterate it, and then we try to build it again, and it's exhausting. It's exhausting. We put it there.
Yeah, I mean, there's it's not just race that has been targeted here. I mean, like you
That's
said,
right.
all of these different experiences, narratives, stories, histories, including the Holocaust, which just blows
Yes,
my
yes,
effing
yes.
mind when you have a commander in chief that is saying that he's here for Jewish people and he will be the most allied person to Jewish people that there has
Mm-hmm.
ever been in the history of the world. And then
Mm-hmm.
you're removing history books and first person narratives about the Holocaust.
There you go. Exactly.
So it just is it's so
Well,
inconsistent.
he's supporting by erasing it. See, if I get rid of it, it didn't happen. And so hopefully you're happy.
Right.
The
Yeah,
heck?
which is just ridiculous. And then to your point about, I just wanted to mention when you were talking about saving books and making sure there are copies and setting up different publishers and such. But for the internet, there is a web archive. And
Awesome.
I am forgetting what it's called, but it archives every single page on the internet. So
Oh, got it,
when
got it.
legislators, in the wake of January 6th, when all of those legislators posted press releases about how heinous it was and how awful it
Yeah,
was and constitutional crisis and blankety blank, blah, blah, blah.
yeah.
And they have since taken those pages down. This web
Mm-hmm.
archive
Oh,
has
that's fantastic.
you can find them by, I think you need the original URL.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Mm-hmm.
really interesting. I mean, that is quite a Herculean feat to try
Oh,
and
yes.
archive the internet, right? But there
Mm-hmm.
are folks that
Mm-hmm.
are doing this work, and I'll find the name of that entity and the link and include it in the show notes for this. But
That's awesome.
um,
Mm-hmm.
I do think that that is something that we need to think about. And I just want to mention here, there's a New York Times opinion editor or author called Marsha Gessen, and
Mm-hmm.
they recently did kind of a roundtable that was then the transcript of which was printed in the opinions, and they talked about how it's really important that we continue to focus on what we have lost and not on what we still have, right? So the narrative could be, okay, so they've taken 381 books out of the Naval Academy, but other libraries still have those books. I still have those books, right? So we've still got them. What they're saying is that we need to stay focused on the fact that we had that 381 books around various people's
Mm.
identities and experiences have been removed, because if we don't continue to focus on the things that we're losing when we're losing them, we will wake up one day and be in an autocratic authoritarian society,
Yes,
right? Like
yes.
because we will have
Mm-hmm.
kind of negotiated our way around the loss by focusing on what we still have, and it's not that bad yet, right? And so I
Yet.
just thought that was a
Mm-hmm.
really profound way to think about it. And this person grew up in Russia, has a lot of
Ah,
experience living
oh
in
yeah.
autocratic and oppressive environments. So anyway, um
Wow.
I think their advice applies when it comes to the removal of books from our public libraries or college
Oh,
libraries.
yeah, it very much reminds me of that slippery slope, Lisa. It's one thing to slip slowly, it's another thing to find yourself at the bottom when you don't know how you got there.
Exactly. Exactly.
Mm, yeah, yeah. All right, Lisa. Well, we're gonna continue to to fight against book banning, to support book sanctuaries, and
Mm-hmm.
continue to support where we can those folks that are continuing to do their level best, including what you mentioned before, risking certain things, whether it's their jobs, their lives, other things, in order to
Right.
preserve knowledge. Very important for us. So, all right, Lisa, what do we have up next here?
All right. So phase two. I really wanted to talk about this because it's been so on my mind. I mean, obviously, we're really aware um, of the federal cuts. We've talked about that with Veterans Affairs, right? And at the beginning of April, those federal cuts came for health and human services. And this is pretty close to me because a lot of the work that I do is with organizations who are funded through health and human services. They receive grants and such. And so Health and Human Services oversees the CDC, NIH, FDA, those alphabet soup organizations that keep have regulations on food products and on the ways in which drugs need to be regulated and such. So not insignificant things. So I wanted to just read off here what got cut, because I think it's easy to hear in the news, oh, there are 10,000 job cuts at HHS and then an additional 10,000 people had opted for that voluntary retirement. So that's 20,000 people, right? But to be clear, that's about 25% of the whole department, right? A quarter. So it's significant. But I want to just read what we have lost. So the National Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion, that was reduced by about a third, and including the loss of the Office on Smoking and Health, Oral Health, Population Health, and some reproductive health divisions. The Office of Health Equity was completely eliminated. There are some things that are written into law that that office was supposed to do. And so that is now moving to the Office of Minority Health and the Office of Women's Health, which I'm actually surprised were not cut, but they still exist.
Yeah,
The
especially
national,
Lisa,
yeah,
since you forgive me, especially
yeah,
since Lisa, you pointed out to me that the actual word woman has been cut
yeah,
from
yeah.
or strongly encouraged to be removed from government communication. But anyway, keep going.
Yes, yes, no, for sure. So discretionary programs were cut from the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, leaving behind only the mandatory World Trade Center Health Program and the Radiation Dose Reconstruction Program. So that World Trade Center Health Program, a number of people got cut from that, and then that was one of the quote unquote errors, and so they've been reinstated.
Reinstated.
This is the program that helps first responders and people that were there on 9/11 and have health implications because of their work on 9/11,
Yes. Yeah.
right?
Long-term medical
Yeah.
concerns. Yep. Yep.
So that
Gotcha.
that didn't go down well when that got cut, and so that got turned around. There's also cuts that have dissolved the Birth Defect Center, um, the National Center for HIV, Viral Hepatitis, STD, and Tuberculosis Prevention lost 25% of its staff. Now, this next one is really close to home for me. So CDC's Injury Center lost roughly a third of its staff. Now, that center includes the Violence Prevention Office, which includes all of the domestic violence work, all of the sexual violence work, the Family Violence Prevention Services Act, FIPSA, that runs out of that Violence Prevention Office and funds nearly all of the domestic violence shelters in the United States. And that whole office was cut. So that Violence Prevention Office doesn't exist. Overdose prevention and suicide prevention are still there. But one thing I wanted to highlight is a number of representatives from multiple states put out a press release related to that violence prevention reduction. And they say the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act program under the HHS Administration for Children and Families is the only federal funding source dedicated to domestic violence and sexual assault shelters and programs, and is the cornerstone of our nation's efforts to address domestic and sexual violence. It supports life-saving services, including emergency shelters, counseling, or crisis hotlines, including the National Domestic Violence Hotline, which, editorial is a 24/7 hotline for people to call if they're in need. And so there are approximately 2,000 FIPSA-funded community-based domestic violence programs and over 240 tribes and tribal organizations for victims and their children that receive that funding, all gone, right? The National Center for Environmental Health lost its division on environmental health and science and practice. The Office of Equal Employment Opportunity, eliminated. Why do we need that? Gone, right? All the people that were tasked with Freedom of Information Act requests, all gone, right? And so HHS is saying that this is about realigning it with its core mission to stop the chronic disease epidemic and make America healthy again. And I am troubled, Shauna, because I am not sure exactly how eliminating all of these offices on smoking and chronic health and violence prevention and all of the kind of
Ridiculous.
associated people that do this
Mm-hmm.
work, including many work that who work with tribes and indigenous communities here, all gone. How exactly does that help make America healthy again and end the chronic disease epidemic? So I realize I was just reading that all off there, folks, but it's just a gutting. And Kennedy is now saying, oops, about, we need to reinstate
Yeah, yeah.
many of those people. And it's just like, I mean, I literally feel like that little emoji where the top of the head is blowing off,
Exploding. Yep, yep,
because
yep.
it's like,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
don't just like cut off the legs and the arms of HHS and then be like, oh, sorry, and grab an arm and sew it back on again, right? Like, you could have just looked more thoughtfully and then been more careful so you wouldn't have to fire people and then bring them back to the office. I mean, anyway.
No, no, that's not how this works around here. And Lisa, the thing that I'm mentioning, and I will continue to say it until he's out of office, is that again, there there is a vendetta to make America great for a specific small slice of a larger pie, not for everyone. And even the word again, I am very offended every time I hear the word again at the end of it, because for some of us, it has never been great. It has been
Right.
better, it has been worse, but great,
Yeah.
no. I'm sorry. I've just had a conversation this morning with my 99-year-old grandmother, and let me be very clear, for some people in this country, it has never been great. So what great are we talking about? Great is relative. And so when you have someone that starts without thought, without foresight, without any scientific data, just Shauna woke up this morning and decided that I really don't care about sexual violence anymore. So let me just get rid of that because that's unnecessary, because that hasn't been part of my experience, Lisa. I'll get rid of it. And that makes America great again because I'm conserving resources. I'm great for whom? Great for whom is always the question. And usually it's for a small slice of people who we happen to have identified and Biden identified as oligarchs. That's who it makes it great for.
Well, yeah, I
Oligarchs,
mean, certainly white men, wealthy white men have
wealthy white men.
it's been great. I wouldn't say it's not that great for them now. I'm not really sure, like I feel like you're still doing pretty well, but the healthy thing is interesting because
Mm-hmm.
I didn't read this article, but in the Atlantic there was something and it had the title like Kennedy is deceived because he's saying make America healthy again, but America was never really that healthy, right? So
Exactly.
where are we going back to? Because the United States has some of the worst health statistics
Oh my
with
God,
kind of
yes.
peer or comparative
Mm-hmm.
industrialized countries in terms of life expectancy, maternal mortality,
Mm-hmm.
chronic disease, obesity, other
Mm-hmm.
various health issues. So
Yeah,
and that's been a problem for a long time. And cutting HHS departments isn't going to turn the tide on those particular issues, right? Like, so I just I'm exasperated. Much like we talked about with the Veterans Administration and the thousands of
mm-hmm.
people that are getting
Yeah,
laid off there, who is going to suffer here, right? It's not
that's right.
the white dudes with the private jets, right? It's the
That's
people
right.
who have the least access to resources, the folks who are most at risk of violence,
Mm-hmm.
are most at
Mm-hmm.
risk of chronic illness and then not having insurance to cover any kind of treatment. And and all the federal funding that's being cut to research institutions, and those research institutions are also doing
Mm-hmm.
things like cancer research and diabetes research and heart disease research, right? In conjunction with NIH and the CDC and all these other places. And the other thing, I'm just on a roll here, right? The FDA, the
Mm-hmm.
FDA was one of the key players in bringing to light the opioid crisis. People who
Yes,
work for
yes.
the FDA, right? Because of the ways in which approval had been given to OxyContin that shouldn't have been, in the way it was
Mm-hmm.
manipulated.
Right.
And we're downsizing this department, you know?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, and again, what we've been finding, I mean, this goes back to our example before where we were talking about Noah being downsized and, portions eliminated and so forth. This again, we are holding, Lisa, we are
Mm-hmm.
holding people to a level of competency that they do not have.
Right,
We would
right,
assume, like, think about, I thought about this even from our higher ed perspective, where a lot of college and university presidents spend an entire year just listening and learning and finding out what's
right,
really going
right.
on before they make any major decisions, right? Now, I realize that, if you're plopped down at a university or at any institution in the middle of a pandemic or a global crisis, a war, whatever it may be, obviously you can't wait a year. But there is a process for learning. And so the fact that a person who has been in office before and showed his incompetency, but now has come back to demonstrate even more incompetency, or at least lackluster empathy or care for anyone other than holding a throne with a crown, obviously they're going to slice and dice portions of this government, not knowing or caring
Yeah.
what they do and who they affect and the
Mm-hmm.
lives that are connected with them. This, we are holding them to a higher standard than they're worth because they have never functioned in ways that actually understood what certain areas did and why they should get rid of or even slim them down. Like I've even, I was listening to this particular podcast that was talking specifically from the perspective of they actually voted for him and they do agree that there is some government bloat, but they don't agree with the process by which Doge or whomever is identifying where the bloat is. And then,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so even they don't agree with the process right now. And so, I think what's going to be fascinating is, frankly, I know this sounds divergent, but it's actually connected to it. Let's see exactly what happens post Cory Booker marathon in regard to resistance of these types of slashes. Because my concern is that the resistance is becoming exhausted, and that's by design.
Right.
It's by design. Let's exhaust folks. So then when I really want to push through something that's important to me, then I'll get it done. Like I think there's something bigger down the road that we haven't even seen yet, but we have to conserve where we're going to focus our resistance and energy in order to even have the capacity to address what's coming down the road.
Yeah, I think it's building, actually. I think the resistance is building.
Abs- I
I
hope
don't,
so. I hope so.
yeah,
I don't
I
know,
don't
but
know
I
that
hope
we're
so.
getting tired, but it was so slow starting because I think folks were just white people in particular were just so oh my God, like,
Shock
deer
and
in
awe.
headlights. Yeah. And they're just
Hmm.
disarray about how to handle it. And, it isn't,
Yeah.
it isn't just the Democratic Party, obviously, but they don't have a lot of levers to pull. And so Cory Booker did what he could. Um, and it was powerful, but is it going to change a whole lot? Maybe not. But I think it has inspired people to say, okay, so we might not be able to vote down a bill right now, right? But we can march in the streets. We can do it. We can slow
Mm,
down Senate business. We can slow down the business in the House. Um,
mhm.
but in the meantime, thousands and thousands and thousands of people are now unemployed, right? And I don't even agree that the federal government is bloated per se. I think that
Right. Me
it is
either. Yep.
over regulated in a way to be as fair as they could possibly be. I was just listening. So one of my favorite commentators, Ezra Klein, has released a book called
Mm,
Abundance. And he's been doing the rounds. He's been on every podcast. But anyway, he was talking to Jon Stewart, and he was talking about the fact that the infrastructure bill that created all this funding for broadband um, out in rural
mm,
communities,
mhm,
there was a 14-step process that communities had to go through to get access to this funds. And that bill was passed in 21 or 22. And at the point that Joe Biden left, only 3 communities had gotten the funding to install broadband in rural communities. And so that's the problem, right? This is what Ezra Klein argues, and I'm inclined to agree with it, that it isn't so much there's too many people, it's that there's too much red tape. And that red tape has just been created and compounded over the years to address kind of lowest common denominator foolish behavior, right? And so
mm.
now you have a
Yes,
situation where you appropriate funding for a really important thing, and 3 years later, you've got nothing to show for it.
that's right. That's right.
And
That's
so
right.
I think some of this with the public health stuff and health and human services is this similar belief that because chronic disease isn't improving, because age expectancy, life expectancies rather, is dropping in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, we're not efficient at the Health and Human Services. And I don't think that's it at all, actually. I think it's something much more systemic.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I would completely agree. Lisa, we can't disclose the client that we were working with, but we can testify to that specifically. Working with certain federal clients where the amount of time, energy, steps, like you were mentioning, that one would have to go through to get even the most minute thing
Yep.
done,
Yep.
and still there is a challenge with it. We've witnessed it even as people who aren't government employees, but have been contractors, subcontractors, where, let's take 3 months to fill out paperwork to make sure that a room is set up well so that Dr. Lisa and I can walk in and train, only to show up and not one thing that was asked for, petitioned for, or approved was actually done. Right?
Yeah.
And that's not
Yeah.
to be facetious. We're just sharing with you our experience of what we probably is the tip of the iceberg of experiences that folks who work in the federal government every single day may experience around, even when one agrees with what needs to happen, the how it happens is problematic.
Yeah.
Problematic.
Yeah.
And so with that, and the levels of approval get very interesting, because it feels, I wish everybody could see us on YouTube right now, but it feels like this, where I'm pointing in two different directions at the same time so that nobody's really responsible. So for some agencies, it's like trying to figure out does the buck stop here? Who has the final say so on a decision? Because usually it's, okay, person A, kicks it over to person B, person C, until finally we've gotten to person Z. Everybody has seen whatever needs to be reviewed, but nobody has said yes or no. There's been times where I would feel better if someone just said no rather than the uncertainty of approval, because
Yeah.
we're all just in this just indecisive matrix that we can't get out of. So I'm imagining, to the nth degree, that happens with folks that have been in government for years. And even the even the fight of that experience, Lisa, of this is how things are in the government. If you're a contractor from the outside coming in and you're used to a decision happening in maybe a couple weeks, that's a 3-month decision that you're asking us for, right? And
Yeah.
normalizing that, right?
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be that way. And this shit is legislated too, right? So
There
it's
you
not,
go.
it doesn't always just emerge accidentally. It is like the legislators who are writing the bills are like, let's write this 14-step fucking process into this. And now, surprise,
Mm-hmm.
surprise, not a single person has felt the effect
Mm-hmm.
of billions of dollars for broadband, right? Or the same is true
Right.
for electric charging stations. I feel like I don't have the numbers, but it is, given the amount of money that was put to that and the length of time that has passed, there are vanishingly few electric
Right.
vehicle chargers, right? And I think that this same logic is being applied to all of these cuts.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And the government is quoted as saying, with HHS, redundant or unnecessary administrative positions, and that's just not it. Things are
Mm,
going to slow, and people are going to get sick, and people are probably going to die as a result of this. And it's not because
as a
there are too
result of it.
many administrators, right? It's
That's
because
right.
systems are too slow.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so
That's it.
we are now just saying, all right, well, we're just going to arbitrarily slash 25% of this agency, because apparently there's fraud, waste, and abuse, which there isn't to any
Mm.
like degree that is justifiable for the level of cuts that we're seeing. Yeah.
Well, and you know what else, Lisa? You know what I'm thinking about too? You just said it. That struck me. Fraud, waste, and abuse. The first two things that I think of when I hear that phrase
Mm-hmm.
is either really uh villainous politicians
Right.
or villainous corporate
Mm-hmm.
capitalist
Mm-hmm.
capitalism, right? What I don't think about when I hear those three words are federal employees that spent their entire lives trying to get their foot in the door because they knew that getting that quote unquote good government job would be able to provide for their families, to
Yeah.
provide stable health insurance, to provide a job that usually is on the grid of the metro, so you wouldn't even need transportation because it was so convenient. You would be able to take care of your family, from a financial perspective, but also a health perspective, even higher education. We're talking about federal servants,
Right.
meaning they are serving they love what they do. I
Public good.
remember
Yep.
the public good. And so listening to a couple of different people, which, had me kind of choked up watching on the news the other night, because of course, all of our news here in Maryland is primarily either Baltimore or DC. So we see a lot of DC
Right.
news, and seeing folks at a job fair, Lisa.
Yeah.
And and we're not talking about, oh, I'm fresh out of college and I got my new suit and I'm
Nope.
showing up to get a job.
Nope.
We're talking about people that maybe never in their lifetimes have ever had to go to a job fair. We're talking about biologists, and the woman that I particularly caught her entire interview was a phlebotomist who studies blood. Had been in her federal government role for 28 years and is now in the job market
Right.
because she has all these years of experience, but she's still not close enough to retirement.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about fraud and waste.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Yeah.
It just doesn't add up to me. I mean,
No.
it just does not add up to me. It's like saying, Lisa, we just went last weekend to see Paddington in Peru. It's like saying Paddington is like a bully. Like that shit don't go
Mm-hmm.
together, right? And that's what I feel like, is that these folks that have served the public good are now being villainized as the problem,
Yep.
when
Yep.
they are the solution. The system is the problem, and people who have gotten confirmed or voted in that don't understand the problem,
Exactly.
they're the ones that are punishing good folks that just want to work, live out their dream job, and help people. That's all they want to
Exactly.
do.
100%. And that is HHS. A lot of people in that department that are helping people. So, all
Yes.
right. Well,
Yep.
I mean, I could rant about this for a long time, but that would probably get boring after a while. So let's go ahead and wrap up our
Yeah.
two-phase extravaganza.
There you go. Two-phase extravaganza. No, thank you all for hanging in there with us as we move to this new phase of the two-phase unphased podcast. Can I get that out? So that's a wrap for this week, though. You can reach us on all of your social media and podcast apps at unphased unedited with brackets around the first un. Email us at info@unfazedpodcast.com, or visit our website unfazedpodcast.com, where you can access all of the new as well as the old shows, because we are barreling towards 200.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
if you like this week, please subscribe, leave a review, share with your friends, coworkers, or anyone else in this phase of your life. So until next time.
All right. See you next time.